All right, you're watching live now. I'm Austin Westfall. Welcome back. The U.S. Supreme Court usually releases lots of major decisions this time of year, right before they go on summer break, and we've been seeing them do that in recent days. We've been waiting for some big ones having to do with immigration, and today, two immigration-related decisions fell in President Trump's favor. Both rulings are shifting the fight over who can seek protection in the United States. Let's check in with immigration attorney and policy expert Andrea Flores. She's here with me. Let's talk about temporary protected status, TPS. That really ended up being one of the main points of discussion today. A live look at the nation's capital, approaching 8:30 in D.C. Today, the court cleared the way for the White House to strip hundreds of thousands of Haitian and Syrian immigrants of a humanitarian status that protects them from deportation. So, Andrea, why did these immigrants get that protection in the first place?
So for both of these countries, they have had temporary protected status since the 2010s. So if you remember the big earthquake that hit Haiti in 2010, that's when the Obama administration originally designated Haiti for TPS, and Syria similarly after the Civil War. And so these are people who've been living in the country legally now for over 15 years at this point. So this is an incredibly disruptive decision that could potentially send people back to countries that quite simply cannot receive them in a stable way, which is exactly why President George H.W. Bush passed and created and signed TPS into law in 1990, because he recognized that there was a foreign policy interest in not returning immigrants back to countries when they are experiencing civil war, environmental disasters, or other extraordinary conditions.
So doesn't TPS also cover Venezuela? Would the recent earthquakes be something that could have triggered a review?
That's exactly right. And I think a Republican or Democratic administration, typically that event is exactly would trigger an expansion of TPS protections for Venezuelans. But what we saw last year was President Trump was trying to terminate TPS for Venezuela. And there are about 400,000 Venezuelans working and living in the United States right now. Can you imagine? I mean, the idea of deporting them back to a country after this type of environmental disaster is really unthinkable. And it's why, like I said, TPS has been a part of our laws for decades, and presidents of both parties have always used it specifically to help out other countries in situations like this.
A lot of the numbers I read say that just short of 1.3 million people use TPS. So what does today's ruling actually mean for those people tangibly this week?
So this week, it depends on what country you're from. So if you have TPS for Haiti or TPS for Syria or Venezuela, it depends on when the date is that President Trump tried to terminate your status. So there should be updates coming from the government soon. Now, for other TPS holders, there's TPS, there's designations for Ukraine, for Afghanistan. There's a re-review coming up for El Salvador. Now, some of those immigrants have been living here since the 1990s, especially the El Salvadorians have been. And this is going to create a lot of fear and uncertainty for those individuals directly, but also those individuals are working for American employers. And so it's creating a great deal of uncertainty in the business community. I've heard from people in the healthcare industry today, in the housing industry. I mean, it could have a really big impact on certain states. You saw Republican governor of Ohio, Governor DeWine, just say that it was going to have a devastating impact in Ohio to lose TPS for Haiti. So I'm sure the White House is hearing from a lot of businesses today about the court's decision.
So TPS is one case. There was another decision having to do with immigration that came down today. I want to get into that as well. That case, pretty much the court says that migrants who are turned away at the border before entering the country are not entitled to apply for asylum. So, Andrea, both Republicans and Democrats, they have wrestled with how to deal with asylum issues, haven't they? How does this issue come to the forefront during the second Trump administration?
This issue is actually, I think both parties at this point really want to reform the asylum system. And so it was a little bit confusing why the Trump administration even pursued this case, because they have already suspended access to asylum at the border, and they didn't need another tool to turn it away, but they revived the litigation because this case stems from an Obama era asylum restriction called metering. And so people need to understand that right now there's not much happening at the border, and our asylum laws as we've known them have effectively been suspended. So you're not going to see a huge human impact in the same way that you'll see with the TPS case. But honestly, the asylum system, Congress needs to address that because the way it's been going across administrations, even President Trump in his first term had huge numbers at the border. It needs to be modernized, it needs to be reformed. And this decision just adds to that.
Some people might read the fine print in that decision, and they might ask, if an immigrant does make it into the country, does that hypothetically mean that they can apply for asylum under this ruling?
There's still some international there's still some legal protections at the border, something called the Convention Against Torture, or pretty much some people are getting screened for that. But other than that, no. I mean, they're being deported back to countries that they're fleeing because the president has said that there's an invasion and it's still an emergency state. But what he's done is essentially what President Biden did something similar to try and get numbers down. So it's been a patchwork border policy for so many years now, and it's frankly like embarrassing that Congress has not addressed this issue sooner because there's so much uncertainty now about what will happen for asylum seekers if they do happen to make it in, because President Trump is also making changes for people already in the country who are like long into their asylum cases. It's getting extremely confusing for anyone attempting to provide guidance to asylum seekers right now.
You could argue that the number one piece of immigration related decisions that we've been waiting to hear on is the decision about whether or not to limit birthright citizenship. We were kind of wondering if it would come down today. It did not come down today, but it's going to come down before the justices go on their summer break. Do we know when we expect to hear that decision? I was reading that Monday might be a possibility.
It seems likely that it's Monday. They often leave their biggest cases for the very last day. And that is quite a big case, right? It could lead to a reinterpretation of the Constitution or the 14th Amendment. I think many legal experts, and myself included, think that the Roberts Court will side against the administration, but we really don't know for sure.
What are the indications that tell us that they might side with the administration?
So just based on the questions at the oral arguments, Chief Justice Roberts seems skeptical, and he's a critical vote to, swing against the administration's interpretation of birthright citizenship, which is not a common interpretation among scholars, right? This is well settled law since 1898. But Chief Justice Roberts did seem quite skeptical of the textual reading and the Solicitor General's argument. So because he expressed that, many feel that it could be a win for the ACLU who argued this case.
Appreciate the time tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.